The goal of today's episode is quite simple, and I hope that you will stick with me for this one because I plan to once and for all fully and completely respond to the number one kind of comment that I get on this channel, which is always some iteration of, when will you leave Christianity alone? It comes in many different forms. It could be, why do you waste your time with this? Oh, you say you don't believe in God, but look at how much energy you're putting towards defeating him. By the way, I'm not trying to defeat God. I don't believe in God. I am trying to stop the harm of religion. I'm not even trying to stop religion. And over the course of the last few years doing this, without exaggeration, I have heard this thousands of times in some form or another. So I made a list. You want to know when I will stop caring about the harm of Christianity? The easy answer is when the harm stops. But I'm going to give you the hard answer, the long answer. I came up with 100 reasons. And I've been working on this list for quite a while. So I am excited to share it with you. And if you are a Christian who happens to be here for this, I want to give one more caveat, just one more minute and we'll dive right in. I understand that you believe in your religion, in your God. And you may not believe this from me, but I truly don't care. I don't want to rob you of your belief. I don't care to necessarily end religion, but the hypocrisy and the harm are so incredibly clear, and I hope that today's list will show that until these particular things are addressed, I will keep speaking out about them. And even though you and I cannot agree on this particular religion, I hope that you and I in general could agree on this list if you were to apply it towards something you believe is not true and is harmful. So truly, I see this as a bridge to be built where you can understand my position even if you do not agree with it. By placing yourself in my shoes for Islam or Hinduism or Mormonism or whatever you take issue with. As I cover this, you might say to yourself, well, that one didn't fit. Well, that one didn't fit. And that may be true depending on your particular denomination. But every single thing that I'm going to cover today has actual examples that happen within some banner of Christianity and not just the occasional one-off. So let's begin. You know me, I'm nice and orderly, so for our 100, we're going to break it down into 10 categories, and let's start with children. When children are no longer frightened with divine wrath or hell. When no child is labeled saved or lost before they can even understand their belief, or before their brain is even done forming. When discipline never invokes divine approval for harm or punishment. When religious education teaches myths as literature and not as literal. And some of these are tricky. I understand right off the bat there are people hearing that last one and saying, well, what am I supposed to do? Not teach my children what I believe? Sure, go ahead, but can you do it critically? Could you maybe do some comparative religion with it? Are you willing to be honest about its origins? Do you even know the origins? Again, I don't want to get off on a side tangent for all of these, but for anyone that you think you have an issue with, trust me, I have thought through it. And if I did a deep dive on it, I have receipts. So again, if there's a lot of pushback on one or two or a few of these, I'll make follow-up videos. When youth programs in general avoid guilt and manipulation and shame. When religious institutions report all abuse full stop to civil law. When clergy lose credentials after any cover-up has been uncovered. Obviously talking about child abuse in the children's section, but in general. When spiritual authority is never used to control sexuality. When children may ask questions or doubt or quite literally, heaven forbid, leave the faith and can do so without fear of being shunned. When honesty and curiosity are praised more than obedience and submission. Let's move into our next category, which I couldn't quite figure out how to title, so I threw the kitchen sink at it. We have integrity, transparency, and accountability. When all denominations publish verified financial records. When no church uses NDAs to silence staff or victims. When internal investigations never replace criminal ones. When apologies also include restitution and policy reform. Not just sorry I got caught again, but real change. The next one is kind of a follow-up off of that one, but more at the institutional level and not at the individual level. Once that reform has taken place, as per the last one, that it is measurable and accountable and transparent. When revival statistics or conversion statistics reflect verified data instead of pastors getting to say whatever they want under some appeal to majority fallacy. Here's a good one. When prophecies or prophetic words are recorded and then reviewed for accuracy. Same with miracle claims. Document them and withdraw them when they're not verifiable, instead of continuing to just use them as ammo in your sermons and teachings. When no mission or evangelism programs hide their true mission. I understand that these places have an agenda. Be straightforward. Why can't you be? And then similar to a couple in there, but having to do with the individual, when these fallen leaders are actually removed from their leadership positions, permanently banned from authority within that religion. By the way, I'm phrasing all of these in the way that answers the question, when will you leave Christianity alone? The next section is similar. I think of it as a companion section. This is titled Truth and Inquiry. When believers test religious claims by the same evidence standards that even they themselves apply elsewhere, everywhere else. When failed prophecies are retracted publicly. When apologetics can acknowledge uncertainty instead of having to redefine it. When contradictions in sacred text are addressed truthfully and not flat out denied. When religious claims can admit human authorship and cultural context. When sermons cite sources as scholars do, not because God said so. When private experiences are shared personally. You think you heard from the Lord, you have a best friend, you want to excitedly share that with them. I don't care if you do that, but stop pushing it on others as a universal truth. When moral progress can be credited to, people, to reason and compassion and evidence, the things we can absolutely point to that have led the way in moral progression. This one's very simple. I know Christians want to continue to give credit to God and Christianity and the Bible and Judeo-Christian values. And I'm not saying they haven't played any part, but where they have, it's usually been despite their history, despite their source material, or fixing the own harm that they have caused. You don't get credit for that. Oh, it's hard not to go down a rabbit hole on each and every one of these. When mystery stops being a shield for harm. When dialogue replaces dogma in every classroom, pulpit, and pew. Speaking of classroom, let's dive into education. How about when no public school presents religion as a fact? How about when no subject is censored to protect doctrine? When school-mandated prayer or devotionals end? By the way, I am fine with groups of kids who share a belief wanting to meet at the place where they all are often, like before school, and have a Bible study. I am not trying to take away religion from people. I'm trying to take away the abuse and the overreach of religion, especially where it is most harmful. When creationism and intelligent design leave the classroom. When all student religious clubs are A, voluntary, and B, peer ran, similar to what I said before. You might think this next one is unfair because I'm reaching into the private school, but there is harm happening at private schools because of this. So when those private schools can clearly distinguish between faith instruction and academic instruction. You want one of the 7 classes of the day to be Bible? Fine, I understand that as a private school, but when you teach math, when you teach literature, when you teach science especially, are you failing these kids because of your religious beliefs? Do students know which claims are doctrinal and which ones are evidence-based? When all forms of education, that means private and homeschool, in addition to public, meet basic standards in science and history is another one, in literacy and civics, regardless of religious belief, these kids are going to grow up, they are part of our society. And if they are not being taught at the same academic level to these very important concepts, you are not only doing them a disservice, you are harming them and their future communities. When universities receiving aid apply equal academic standards to theology departments, when students never face pressure to convert to get a scholarship or social access of any kind, when school staff and especially counselors rely on evidence-based help, not clergy guidance or biblical advice. We can move into healthcare and the medical side of things. How about when hospitals and clinics make medically necessary decisions based, off of medical evidence and not doctrine? And again, I know that I've covered a lot already, and if you are a Christian fighting this, a friendly reminder, just consider if all of these things were Muslim. For every example I gave, just swap in a Quran instead of a Bible, surahs instead of verses, and on, and you should be able to see how I'm feeling. This was one of my first, just a quick caveat, wake-up calls when I was still within Christianity, where I had previously been so okay with all of the overreach in education, in healthcare, in politics, because it was Christian overreach and I was a Christian. And as I matured, I realized we might not always be a Christian nation, and I definitely wouldn't want this from a religion I didn't believe in. And oh wow, look at that. Brandon came upon the need for separation of church and state all on his own. And even as a Christian, I began to be okay with things like gay marriage, even though at the time I was bigoted towards it, for lack of a better term, through sheer indoctrination and brainwashing, because I didn't ever want any other religion to have a say in these legal practices. So again, I do empathize with those of you who are still stuck like, well, no, but these are things I want. I want them pushed. It's okay when the barriers are broken to my benefit, but how small does your thinking have to be to hear it like this and still not understand the unfairness? So either you don't understand, hopefully this helps, or you don't care because you're a hypocrite, in which case, what more do I need to say? That's wrong, even biblically. So come on. When medical counseling replaces superstition and guilt with therapy and data. When end-of-life decisions respect patient choice, not institutional faith. When chaplains offer comfort and real care without evangelism. Well, Brandon, then they wouldn't be a chaplain. Then don't be a chaplain. And again, maybe some of you aren't familiar with how the church does this, how they visit hospitals or hospice centers, trying to save souls at the last minute, which is very abusive and extremely disruptive to families who are trying to go through this process with a loved one. If you, the church, think it's so important to do outreach and be there for people and provide support and comfort, do so without all of the conversion baggage. If you can't, stay out of it. How about when no illness is ever blamed on sin, the devil, or lack of faith, or lack of prayer, or all the other things that so many millions of people get told in some of their worst, hardest, most suffering moments? When medical research is never suppressed because of religious discomfort? When health programs abroad are truly about health and not conversion? Similarly, when humanitarian aid is given without restriction. We have too many examples of you have to come listen to a sermon first. You have to get a Bible first. You have to profess faith first. How unbelievably manipulative. How can you even feel good about this? How could that possibly be a good and true, perfect God's desire? You know why I demand more from you, Christians, is because I demand more from your God. If you really serve a God that is 100% perfect, 100% just, 100% loving, you couldn't do most anything on this list anyways. Something to think about. What about when all public health decisions are made by experts based off evidence and data, not clergy or theology? Let's move into violence and social control. When no sermons glorify violence or conquest because it's divine. When militias and hate groups can't find sanctuary in churches. When spiritual warfare metaphors, which I guess most of the time they're being made aren't metaphorically, but either way, when they don't dehumanize opponents. When dissenters are not shamed nor stalked nor slandered as enemies of God. When families accept deconverts as morally equal. It's amazing how many people in my life think 100% differently of me just because of a faith I no longer profess, while I still act exactly the same if not better, in a moral aptitude. And I think my morals have gone way higher, even by Christian standards, since leaving the faith, because I am more empathetic. I am more compassionate. I don't think prayers are going to do anything. I don't think any God is up there orchestrating everything for good. I give more, I do more. And yet I am seen as lesser than morally just because of a thought. When missionary work values consent and honesty over conversion quotas, when deliverance rituals avoid actual danger and harm, as well as manipulation and coercion, when domestic abuse is never excused by hierarchy or headship, or the need to submit, when religious identity is not used to sanctify or justify or morally elevate any political agenda or movement, when religious symbols are not used to endorse any nation or army or party or ideology, but remain personal expressions of faith. We touched on a couple of these, but let's move into money/charity. When donations are just requested honestly, hey, we need money, not through fear or potential curses or potential blessings. When prosperity teaching ceases entirely. When charity is given freely, not as evangelism bait. When disaster relief prioritizes victims over conversions. Again, I know there's some crossover and some of these are redundant, but they just fit too well in multiple categories. So I try to word them uniquely and cover them from a different perspective, but these are important. When tax law treats clergy like any other employee, I will never understand these kinds of exceptions. When church property contributes equally, fairly to shared infrastructure. When religious nonprofits publish measurable outcomes for aid. Ideally, no financial advice from the pulpit, but if you can't help yourself, could it be, ethical and evidence-based? And when faith leaders no longer sell access to miracles or blessings. Let's get into media, rhetoric, and just the culture at large here. When religious media values accuracy over outrage, when losing cultural dominance isn't equated with persecution. I can never get this quote right. Equality feels like oppression to the privileged or something like that. It rings so true, not just within religion, within everything. So many times when people in America say that they are being oppressed or persecuted, they are just simply no longer getting to unfairly ride the wave at the top. When you're here and now other people get to be here, that's not oppression. I am not saying that Christian persecution doesn't happen, and especially in other places in the world. I am saying when your neighbors who are gay got to get married, it didn't hurt you. When critique can be seen as accountability, and again, not as an attack, or worse, not as blasphemy. When debates with skeptics use facts, not fear, not dogma, not excuses that have been debunked 100,000 times, but you're just saying it not for the source of truth, but to convince the people who are still listening on your side. When faith outlets invite credible scholars and philosophers and scientists. When emotional manipulation in worship is described as a tactic, not a miracle. When celebrity conversions aren't used as marketing. When stories of people leaving the faith are treated with respect and curiosity. And again, not used for your fear-mongering. And I think it's a nice segue in general, that last section, to this one on rights and equality. When no belief system determines who can marry, who can lead, or even who can serve. When gender or race or status no longer limit authority within churches. When divorce or contraception or family planning no longer have to face church shaming or stigma in general. When belief or disbelief never determine someone's ability to get work or housing. When charities serve people equally without faith requirements. When apostasy carries no social cost or family disruption. I should say family rejection. I understand why it would cause disruption, but if you are one of the parents who has cut your child off, I'm not even saying financially, from your life because they believe differently than you, I can't think of a worse act of love. It's not even an act of love, a worse excuse for love, what you think is love, when mixed belief families are supported and not pressured, when illness or disability is met with care and not judgment, when former teachings that justified slavery or racism are publicly denounced, when prisoners or soldiers can decline religious programs without losing privileges, and we can end with law and politics and government, when no scripture is used to justify law or policy. It sounds insane just to say it out of my mouth, like how unbelievably obvious. Again, put yourself in my position. Would you ever want a certain surah from the Quran dictating your law? Of course not. Be consistent. When politicians never cite faith as qualification for leadership, when no oath of office requires or even utilizes a holy book, when churches receive no government subsidies or tax loopholes unavailable to others, when clergy have no special legal immunities, when no court argument invokes God's will to deny rights, when government events begin without compulsory prayer or worship, when religious liberty is never used to harm or remove someone else's liberty, when Christian nationalism has no foothold in government and policy. That's 99. I think that this last one usurps all categorization, when Christianity can function personally, privately, and peacefully, never as a weapon, never as a shield, never as any kind of state ideology or policy. It's really that simple. If you're a Christian, treat your faith, your belief, the same way you would want your, again, I'm using it because it's such an easy example for how many Christians think so horribly of the Muslim. And by the way, I disagree with Islam just as much. I think Islam is incredibly harmful as well. But I'm not one of the people that thinks Christianity is all love and butterflies and Islam is all jihad. No. You both serve an Abrahamic God. You both utilize your ancient scriptures as ultimate truth and as a card to do whatever you want, regardless of secular consequence. So if you wouldn't allow it from them, don't allow it from yourself. And the newest excuse I'm hearing is, well, if we don't allow it for ourselves, then we'll end up allowing it for them. How utterly ridiculous. If we work hard to have policies and, I don't know, stick to the Constitution and remove all religion from any actual position of authority, we will have nothing to worry about. But as long as we continue to make exceptions for one religion when the other religion gains more majority, which is happening, by the way, Christianity is going down, Islam is going up. If you're really a Christian with this kind of a fear, the best thing you can do is shut yourself down while you're still the majority. Impose the laws correctly. Stop justifying your hypocrisy so that we can create a country that is actually free from anyone's harmful ideology outside of evidence and reason. This and all the other reasons are why I continue to make a couple videos a week, pointing out harm and hypocrisy, in addition to showing how we can know that this isn't even real, that this God doesn't exist, that that book is not inspired, that even if it all was true, it would still be bad and negative and harmful, and shown in the actualities of people who take the Bible, the faith, the God, the religion seriously. So there you have it. For the next 1,000 times that I get told this kind of a statement, I will just link this video. And again, you may have an answer for one or two, or you may say, well, I don't do that. No, you just uphold a religion that does. Well, that's not my denomination. Well, it's your neighbor's denomination. Like, where's the accountability? I could throw 100 verses, even though there's 100 that will contradict these 100, but I could throw 100 verses at you about your moral duty here. Not being a part of the harm doesn't mean you're not a part of the problem. So that's it. Thank you for your attention. I'm curious to see what you'll have to say about this one. I know it's pretty different and unique here on this channel, but I thank each and every one of you for being here. And again, I know it's passionate and I know I come off harsh sometimes, but I try very hard not to exaggerate, very hard not to be unnecessarily rude. I am not out here calling names and insulting people personally. I am here providing what I see as fact-based evidence for the harm of religion. And specifically, I'm concerned about Christianity because it is the majority in my country and it is affecting in real time my life and the lives of everyone around me. So when all of this ends, I will shut up. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, Grant, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kiboga, yes, the Kiboga, Matthew, Perry, and Sean. My humanist heroes, Chris, Christian, Craig, James, Jared, Christy, and Matthew. My atheist advocates, At Guitar, Caleb, Dakota, Dan, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Jeremy, Jugs, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons.